All right. Good afternoon, everyone that's here joining me, whether you're joining me live or joining me on the replay. We're going to jump right into this. So, the title for today's talk, as you can see, is The Nervous System Secret. And for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Pat Smith. I'm a men's high performance coach, and I've been doing this almost 3 years now. My story of getting into this world is a little bit abstract, lots of different twists and turns through it all. But to give you a little bit of a background, I started in the corporate world back in 2015 when I graduated college, working in multiple different sales roles for a few different Fortune 1000 companies, mainly in the RV and marine industry. I'm originally from Northwest Indiana, so lots of manufacturing going on there. During my time, let's say the first 3 to 4 years, I was all in, rising, wanting to rise the corporate ladder. And again, nothing wrong with that. However, I just saw something greater for me in terms of the passions and things that I was passionate about. Fast forward to around 2018, I was interested in trying to figure out what it would be like for me to start my own business and what would that business even be. And so I started to do a little bit of introspective work and reflect back on what am I actually passionate about. And the one thing that really stood out that I had been always interested in was health and wellness, and primarily from doing fitness and working out with my dad, all the way at a very early age when I'd go to the YMCA back when I was, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old. Back when this happened, 2018, I realized that I had been working really hard on the physical aspect. I haven't really paid much attention to nutrition or anything along those lines. And so I loved to cook. I was always in my grandma's kitchen growing up. And so I decided I was going to go back to school to get a holistic nutrition certification. And back in 2018, while I was simultaneously working my full time job, which I went and did. I went back and got my holistic nutrition certification through Bowman College, an online university. They also have in person, but it's located in California. It's a holistic health university. And I graduated, finished that out. And around 2020, I started working with individuals specifically on nutrition coaching. And to me, I thought that that was a life changing thing. And for many, it is. And I'm still a firm believer in, of course, working out, eating well, sleeping good, all of those main habits that I would say incorporate the physical aspect of health. But the one thing that I realized was the individuals who were very successful and that I coached were individuals who also took time to work on their mental and emotional health, their mental and emotional fitness, if you will. And so that got me thinking as I reflected back on my own journey, what was the true catalyst to transform from where I started in my personal development journey all the way back in 2016 when I was at my lowest moment, which that's a whole story for another day, all the way to getting to where I was today. And that essentially was the inner work that I did on my mindset, my mental resilience, my emotional intelligence, and all of those things. And so for me, I realized that not only did I want to help individuals in nutrition, but maybe I wanted to take it a step further and help individuals really master their inner world. So I think about their mental performance, their emotional intelligence, or their emotional resilience, so that when they operate at home, in the workplace, even in their own lives when no one else is watching, they can do so from a very grounded, centered, and present place. And so when I was getting into a couple years after into coaching, which was a little bit on the side while still working my full-time corporate job, I found I was big into Dr. Joe Dispenza, still am, lots of his meditations, attended a few of his retreats. And at one of the retreats, I realized that he had a corporate training entity where he helped individuals utilize his methodologies and tools in the workplace to both enhance their performance and improve productivity, improve, workplace wellness, and of course, improve the person on a more individualized aspect, if you will. So, all that to be said, um, I learned about that and I got interested and I dove in and I had applied. There was about 300 or 400 applicants that year. There was about 70 that were accepted. So 70 of us went for a week long to Mexico back in 2022 to get trained specifically by Dr. Joe Dispenza to learn how to utilize these tools and help him um, spread his message, but into the workplace. And so since then, so that was mid 2022. And fast forwarding to now, I quit my corporate job just shortly thereafter in October of 2022. So I've been doing this almost, as I said, 3 years full time. And so now, as I go in and work with tons of different high performing men in all different roles, I'm realizing that the more and more individuals start to lean into doing some of this personal development work, not just from the workouts, not just from the eating right and sleeping well, but the emotional intelligence work, the mental performance, and really understanding their mindset, their tendencies, their stories. This can have a huge catalyst in every single thing that they do. And this is important to me because one, I saw how drastically I have changed, all for the better, I'll add, at least from what I could see. And also because I see the actual ripple effect that it has from the clients that I have served. And so serving over 100 different guys in all different areas, all different industries, all different demographics and areas around the US, and seeing where that spreads down to. Because when I think about it, my extent and reach can only go so far. So the majority of the individuals that I prefer to work with are individuals who are top performing in whatever it is they do. And whether that's a business owner or an executive or a top performing manager or just a top performing individual in their company or maybe just even in their home life, there's still a ripple effect on what goes on. Because when I'm happy, healthy, and focused and present in all everything that I do, personally, professionally, wherever, it's a trickle effect to my colleagues, to my clients, to my potential clients, to my family, to my friends, to my other loved ones, to my distant relatives, and even to strangers in my community. So it really creates this web of influence when we can master this. So we're going to dive into a couple different strategies later on today. And then I'm going to give you a couple different stories and some things and challenges that I see most guys face today. And at the very end, we'll have some Q&A for you guys to dive in. So let's continue on. It's a little bit about me, a little bit about my backstory. If you haven't become familiar with me or we haven't met, whether it's in person, virtual. So I'll jump right in, right? We've entitled Nervous System Secret. And so the reason why I find this to be super important is when I start to work with a lot of clients, they're always talking about wanting to do more and to get further. And while I'm a big, big proponent for having big aspirations and dreams, definitely not excluding that. White knuckling it, only doing things through sheer force is a recipe for disaster. And we'll get into that when I talk about the breakpoint principle here in a little bit. However, that is just creating what I would call an unsustainable loop. Because what happens is we work really, really hard, nonstop to try to reach a goal. So hard, in fact, that by the time we actually get there, we literally can't even enjoy it. Why? Because we're depleted, we're down and out, and we have nothing left to give. But we have everything that we wanted, but we don't have anything internally. And so it becomes this loop, if you will, which we'll see a little bit more about that here in a minute. And what I find as well is that it really doesn't allow for many of these men who have these big goals and dreams and aspirations to step into tapping into what really their true potential is. Because when they're white knuckling it through life, running on that endless stress, if you will, they're literally operating at like 50 to 60% of their actual capacity because no one can operate at that high level at all times. We can get up there and then we can rest and recharge and then get back up there. But doing it long term is really like we get up there and then we just start to plateau and die off. And that to me is just operating at half speed. And so when it comes to the nervous system secret in this title, it's really about understanding our inner game because to me, that's the missing piece. So for the individuals that I find that are very successful and do it sustainably and can do it for a really long time, they understand that it's not just the workouts, it's not just the work ethic, it's really mastering their inner world, both the emotional and mental side of things, so that when they enter in and have to do the hard work, the physical part of it all, they are that much more primed to be able to do it in a much easier way. So I'm going to share with you just briefly a little bit about one of my clients because this is a common story that I see all the time. And firsthand, after working with, like I said, over 100 different guys in different capacities, this story is one that I hear really often. And one is Matt. So Matt, you can see his little testimonial on here. He's a top performing mortgage loan officer here in Charlotte. And Matt was I believe when we started working together, at least started having these conversations, Matt was about 4 years into his career in the mortgage world. He'd been in a previous industry before. However, Matt was hustling, grinding, and building his business as a reputation and relationship business, really just driving it and doing it nonstop. However, it came with tons of costs. Physically, mentally, emotionally, he started to get drained in all those different areas. What I saw when we first started talking was finally and always overthinking to and from work nonstop about all the deals that worked or didn't work or might work, finding himself feeling stressed and overwhelmed when things fell through. And then as a result, it was impacting his physical health and then his ability to get into more social relationships. And so Matt and I had quite a few conversations. And in fact, Matt and I had known each other for close to 3 to 4 months before he had ever even first had the first conversation with me. But once we started to dial in and figure out what exactly was holding Matt back from where he wanted to go, we started to unpack a few things. And a couple of those things that I mentioned, the overthinking, the overwhelmed nature of the business and real estate, and we dove into one of my signature trainings, which is called the Mental Performance Accelerator. And we were able to help him learn what it would take for him to not only upgrade his mindset, but upgrade his nervous system and upgrade himself internally. And when he did, changes started to happen rather quickly, to be honest. I remember getting into, maybe it could have been the first second or third call following the actual training. So let's say 2 to 3 weeks out, and Matt had texted everyone. He wears one of those Whoop watches or bands, and he had mentioned that he had started before the training at about 2 hours in the red zone of stress, if you will, based on his Whoop, for most days that he could ever remember. And the last time he checked, he was down to about 10 minutes a day. And so to me, that was huge because a lot of the work that I get into is helping individuals bring more confidence into their work, bring more clarity, be at more peace. And oftentimes that isn't very quantifiable. But to be able to see that through his tracker, to go from 2 hours a day of stress to 10 minutes a day was absolutely huge. And the most important piece, because many of us guys look at numbers, and we also, um, this is a topic for another day, but tie our worth to our accomplishments. Nonetheless, not only was Matt able to truly decrease his stress levels, truly decrease how he was feeling in and outside of work, but he also was able to hit President's Club that year and to double his revenue in his business from the year before, all while feeling less stressed. Now, I get it. That's amazing. Matt did great things. And that was in 2024. However, I still keep in touch with Matt because I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina. He actually helped us out get into the house that we're in today as a mortgage officer. So plugging Matt right now. Outside of that, I texted Matt, I believe it was last month sometime, just shooting him a message, asking him how he was doing. And Matt had reminded me that not only did he do great last year in his business, but at March of this time in 2024, he had exceeded his quarter 2 revenue all the way within quarter 1. And so all that to be said is when we start to learn these tricks, tips, tools, and we start to practice them and they become consistent and they become more normal and automatic, they don't just happen like a quick fix. They're not a band-aid. They're like surgery from the inside. And then we step out in this 2.0 version of ourselves. So they're long lasting is what I'm trying to say. So sharing a little bit about Matt's story, and the real problem with this is, and this is even for Matt's story and just many other stories that I find, and the real problem is this cycle on how it typically goes. And the first thing is these big goals and aspirations. And as I said, that is not the problem. I can tell you that's not the problem. Having big goals, having dreams, having aspirations, huge. I am a big proponent for that. However, what goes on is when we are operating from this incoherent state, which we're going to get into here in a little bit, is that we start to get upset. We start to find ourselves frustrated or stressed or overwhelmed or anxious because we aren't quite where we want to be. And what ends up happening is many guys, and this is in step 3, as you can see, Many guys think that once they get the money, once they reach a certain level of success or hierarchy in their business, then all of a sudden that internal chaos will start to subside and things will go away. But if we think about this analogy, if you will, of someone who has very little confidence and all of a sudden they are gifted a red Ferrari, when they jump in that red Ferrari, they do feel an ode of confidence, but it's only for a little bit, and it's a blanket ode of confidence because it essentially will go away and their true colors will show. And so this same thing goes on when we start to feel stressed, when we start to feel anxiety or overwhelmed because we haven't hit these goals. And we're always looking for the money, the success, the achievement to help us soothe the internal struggle with an external solution. It doesn't end up working real well. And so where do most guys turn? Well, we've seen most of it and I've been there before. So I'm guilty of this for sure. However, things and times change. But many guys will start to reach for alcohol or drinking and smoking and doing all of these things that are essentially external solutions trying to fit in this internal struggle. And that is what I would say a backwards approach, because now we are reaching for something outside of us to work on building up something internally. And that is a little bit of a misconception on how that typically works. Because as I mentioned in the red Ferrari example, it's our own inner confidence that creates who and how we operate, not something external to us. And so by reaching to the alcohol, to the drinking, to smoking, or whatever it is, every time we further and distance ourselves from the gap. And that gap is bigger between us being able to do the hard work, the inner work, the interpersonal work, and actually moving away from that. And that bigger that gap gets, the more men tend to avoid it. And once it gets too big and it disappears, now they're unaware of it and it's not even worth going after because they've avoided it for so long that the challenge of getting back into it scares them from ever moving forward. And it becomes this stuck cycle. And the cycle typically looks like this, right? We start in this, what I would call an incoherent state. And so I'm letting an individual back in the room real quick. So we typically find ourselves in this stuck state, right? This is the stuck cycle is what I have it titled as here. And this is an incoherent system. And what I mean by that is if you can picture and imagine a rowboat, let's say a rowboat with 10 guys on it, and all of them are rowing on their own pace. No one's doing it in sync. So what goes on is we learn and we live in this incoherent system where it's internally disrupted. And we're trying to go full steam ahead, but in our mind, in the way we're living internally, we're literally spinning in circles. And this is a dangerous place to be because we are trying to we're taking misaligned actions towards our goals. And at the end of the day, when we are going from that state of mind internally and state of being with that level of action, we end up feeling, well, we either feel depleted, disappointed, not upset. And this is where we're at in step 3 right here. You can see the emotional trap, if you will. And without becoming aware of it, without even knowing that it's going on, to then get into a coherent system, we just end up further incoherent and we take another action based off that feeling to try to get us away from it. That keeps us feeling whatever that might be, disempowered, upset, angry, frustrated. And without knowing that that's what's going on in here, then we keep this cycle going. And the more we do it, the more it becomes hardwired and the harder it is to get away from it. And so we will repeat this until we finally become aware of it. And so for anybody watching this here today or on the call today, if you are unaware of this or this is new, then this could be a turning point. Just to know that this internal state is actually putting me into taking actions that might actually put me to feeling the way I actually don't want to feel. So, what is it that we can actually do about it? Well, I said it already, but the first step is simply just becoming aware. We have to become aware. If we don't know that it's going on, then we're unconscious to it and we will run on autopilot, wondering what's going on or why we are this way or why we can't reach these goals when really it's already in here. We just have to dust off the lenses to actually see for what's going on. The next is for us to move from that incoherent state into a coherent state. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, thinking about that rowboat example that I shared earlier, if there's 10 guys on a rowboat and they're all rowing at their own pace, they're out of sync and they just turn in circles. However, when we move from incoherent to coherent, that is when all 10 rowers are rowing at the exact same time. And when we're in that place, when we step in to take action, when we step in to work from that place at our job, at our home, with our kids, with our family, with our friends, we step in and the work that we do is exponentially better. It results in us feeling these elevated emotions because we start to feel confident that we actually moved forward. We start to feel excited. We can find ourselves in gratitude or joy. And internally, the coolest part about this is when I start to feel that way, the mind's paying attention and it's saying, wow, that's something new for Pat, but it actually felt good and it didn't tax our system like frustration or anger or disappointment or disempowerment did. We kind of like this. And the body starts to take note and it stacks those little wins and it helps us out in the future. And so we can move away from the stuck cycle into this new operating system by literally blending and helping out our new baseline to elevate from an incoherent state to a coherent state. So, the challenge, though, that the reason this typically doesn't work for most guys or just not even knowing how to get out of it is number one, stress in itself is addictive. It's essentially a chemical. It goes off when we find ourselves in an emotionally heightened situation. And so, just like drugs, just like alcohol, just like gambling, they all create a chemical change in the body. And so, just like stress, also a chemical, the hormones of stress are highly addictive. And so, stress becomes the new normal. And if all we do, again, is white knuckle our way to the finish line, we are trying to use sheer force and willpower, but that only will get us so far because at times we need to go on autopilot to rest, to recharge, and to revitalize. But if all we're doing is pushing, 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 how do we ever get maintenance on the vehicle? And if we're running at a million RPMs and we're redlining all the time and we never turn it down or never go in to get the oil change or the tires fixed, essentially and eventually, you know exactly what is going to happen if we redline it all the time. What does that look like? Well, we're trying to chase our tail. We find ourselves always rushing around. And we end up physically one place, mentally somewhere else. And this is not allowing for us to be present. And if we're not present here, we're only two other places. Anxious about the future or worried about what happened in the past. And then how could we ever really be truly operating at 100% here in the present moment where it matters the most? Now, the second challenge is, and this is not necessarily all of our fault, but it is our responsibility to become aware of it. But imagine what the entire society has led us to believe that we can't have a level of success without tons of different stress. And so, all right, we've built many of us, and I've been there before, and at times, sometimes I have to recall and remind myself to take a step back. But many of us have built our life literally based on stress. And so, if all we do is go after the money and hoping that the money will create that soothing nature of the stress, it becomes very difficult to avoid that because it just becomes a cycle, as we saw earlier. And we never can get back on track because we find ourselves in this loop. We keep falling further and further behind because every single time that we reach for something else, I said it earlier, the scrolling, the alcohol, the drugs, any type of avoidance mechanism. It's basically a hyperactive avoidance to actually facing what we need to do to move us forward. It pulls us so far apart that again, we feel like we can't ever catch up, so we just never even begin. And then that perpetuates that cycle. And the last thing, as we know, is literally we find ourselves depleted, zero energy, our performance, both at work, at home, What I like to say is from the boardroom to the bedroom, they all plummet, which isn't what any of us really want. The confidence levels, confidence levels decrease, the self doubt increases, and it just becomes this very, very vicious cycle. Okay, so we want to we're going to break down three main components of this today, and that is the breakpoint principle. Then I'm going to share with you the RPM method, just so we can become aware of that, and then the rise breathing system on some tools we can actually use in the moment. Okay, so what we're going to do for the next point, the next part of this is go straight to my iPad, and I'm going to pull that up here for you guys all to see. So I'm going to log into here real quick, get this set up, and here we go. Switch you guys over to the iPad. All right. Y'all should be able to see my iPad now. Oh, perfect. I'm going to bring it up on my screen as well. All right. So the first thing we're going to dive into is what I'm coining as the breakpoint principle. So pull this up and make sure we're good to go. There we are. All right. So we've got So we've talked about this cycle so far and what ends up happening when we continually perpetuate that cycle. And the goal is for us to find a level of awareness to know when we are getting too close to what we're going to call the breaking point. Because once we reach that breaking point, as I mentioned, it's difficult to catch back up. And so there's a couple different components to this. So it kind of looks like this. All right, so you've got this one right here. You've got right here. Now this is your level of performance. And this is our overall capacity for stress. Now, right here, this is an okay zone. But a lot of times right here, where we're not really having to perform much, we're not being very challenged, and our stress levels aren't that great, a lot of times we are using we're underloaded, if you will. So not enough stress. Because again, stress can be helpful. It's just when it's going on long term, it's not real great. So this is an okay place, but this is when we can end up finding ourselves a little bit bored in what we do. We're kind of going through the motions, not real excited, all that good stuff. And you can stay here indefinitely, but the likelihood of you getting to the goals and dreams that you want are a little bit non-existent, let's say. Next up is this is the next area right here. And so this area in particular is this is really like the optimum place, because right here you are finding yourselves with a nice balance of stress and also challenge and performance. So we all have a level of skill that we all have naturally and through that we've developed. And so when we can push that to our limit without overextending ourselves, that's that sweet spot, if you will. So through here, this is a really good place to be more often. And this would be what we would see. Many of us have heard it. We can call it whatever we want, but this is flow. This is that intersection between when we're challenged just enough and when we're actually able to use our skills enough to where we're not bored. Okay, so this is a great place to be. Now, this is right at the very top. This is what I would say the break point becomes. Because if we are unaware of what's going on in our life and we keep white knuckling it through every single thing that we do, sheer force, never taking time to rest, thinking, and we need to look for everything outside of us to find the solution on why we can't seem to hit that goal, or we can't seem to stay into that place, and we go over this point right here, we find ourselves with overloaded, too much stress, too much going on, and we start to reach that hump to where we are starting to, as you can see, like let's say if this is 100% operating, right? We start to go down. And if this is 50, right? So we start to go down, and what happens is there we are. Not after long, we think we're pushing really hard, going really hard towards our goals because we're white knuckling it. We're using all the substances and things we can just do to keep us going, to really go after the goals, no matter what our engine light or our body is trying to tell us to slow down. And we find ourselves here. And if you ever find yourself anxious, overwhelmed, constant stress, you might find yourself here. Now, if we keep ignoring this time and time again, and it just keeps going on, and we're not taking these signals, just, I'm getting using back to a car analogy, very easy is if, at this point, it's like, okay, we're at optimal RPMs. Now, at this point, we're redlining, but eventually, if we're just redlining all of the time, we already know what the outcome is going to be. That's this very bottom spot. And here is essentially that full breakdown. And this is essentially our point of no return. And at the point of no return, we have a lot of work to do to get, because now we're at 0%, right, operating. Think of all the time, energy, and effort it's going to take to get back up to this 100%. And so this is typically what we see happen. And if we would like to maintain this, then we first need to become aware of it, which is if you're watching and you've got this far in the recording or you're here live, then you're becoming aware of it. You can start to look for cues to notice, oh, wow, I'm starting to feel tons of this. If I go too much further, push too much harder without bringing myself into some practices that would regulate me, then I'm going to head here. But if I can get into here, and before it gets too late, I can enter back here, I'm in a safe spot. So the first step is just becoming aware of it. Now, we want to figure out what it's like for us to maneuver past this. So I'm going to quickly jump into the next piece here. And before I do, I want to just share that the majority of us want to feel this. We want to be there indefinitely if possible. Now, are there times where the circumstances in life get crazy and we end up over here? Absolutely. That happens to the best of us, myself, and everyone else you can think of. But essentially, our dream life for many of us is just to crush it professionally, make good money, do work we love, and all feel fucking great doing it, right? And that means we have to be in great shape physically. We need to be mentally sharp. We need to be emotionally resilient so that no matter the challenge that goes on, that we can handle it. And it's interesting. You think back to the whole adage of more money, more problems. And the interesting thing is, if we have more money and more problems, it's only an issue if our personal development hasn't kept up with par with those level of problems. Because if those problems keep creeping up in our personal development, or our capacity, which is what you see in the break point principle, to take that stress on, it's going to drain us no matter how much money we have. But if the problems that we continue to rise and the stakes are bigger because there's maybe more money in it or more responsibility, but our personal development and our capacity for stress is also rising, it's the same problem of a $50 million problem as a $5 problem if our mental and emotional capacity can handle it. And so that's my goal with anybody that I work with, is to develop that so that no matter what. And I was just talking with one of my other clients, Jason, and he works in investments and real estate, and they're talking big numbers, right? 40, 50, 60, $70 million deals. And he's able to stay emotionally stable in those moments because of many of these same tools. And so our goal is to create a calm mind, be regulated in our emotions, and when we do, we can be present, because when we're present in here, we are at our absolute best. But again, if I'm over here anxious about all the ways things could go wrong, then I'm not here in the present moment. And that is like saying that I want to be 100% here and all in, but really I'm 50 here and 25 in the future and 25 in the past. And then I wonder why I can't reach my goals. And so, all that to be said is we want to give you a couple tools, and then we're going to have a little Q&A here at the very end. Um, the next part is what we're going to call is the RPM method. Okay. So we want to talk about, we talked about earlier the rowboat example, but there's incoherent and coherent. So this is like our internal system. Okay, so if we were to measure our heart rate variability or something of the sorts, or even our brain waves, you'll notice that when you're incoherent, this is out of sync, if you will. Stuff's going like this: fast, really quick, hard to comprehend. We're anxious, we're all over the place, and it's not a really good place to perform from. Right? That would be most likely in these two sections. However, if we're coherent, stable, we're moving, we're good. Again, that's us here in flow. Okay, but how do we, well, like, why is it important to be right here? Why is it important to be here and elongate? So we have RPM. Okay, so first off is to regulate. So if we were to look at the break point here, right, we get here and we're at the peak. Okay, so if we don't utilize the first R, like the first part of this acronym, regulate, then what happens is we will go from coherent, aka in sync, and then we'll go right back down to incoherent, and then we fall out. However, if we can understand when it's like when we were at our peak and then regulate, right, that's right here, then we can perform, which is the P, perform from this place. And that's like saying, hey, I can be present, I can feel good, I can feel in flow. And I'm just going to allow for you guys to paint your own picture. When I'm present, when I'm focused, when I'm not anxious, when I'm not worried about all the what ifs or what happened to me yesterday, and I'm here in the moment, the likelihood of the type of work that I put out, how present I am with my friends, my family, my loved ones, my, strangers in my community, we already know where it goes. It goes way up. And so that's what we're all interested. That's why many of you are here today. Now, this is great. However, the best part is this, the M, for multiply. Okay? Because what goes on is here we go. We get here, we regulate, we perform, the body takes note and realizes it's, wow, we can do this. We just have to be aware of it and we have to use tools to regulate ourselves. We can do this extensively. And again, and again. And these bursts become quicker. We do it in a faster rate. And so it's like stacking wins. It's like going to the gym, it's more reps. And the better reps that we do and the more times we go to the gym, the easier it becomes. And the best part about all of this gets expanded into everyone around you, right? You can leverage this level of efficiency by the amount of output you have, the money you make, the energy that it takes for you to get there, or the energy that you get built up by all the confidence of being able to stay here indefinitely, versus the amount of energy it takes to go down and then back up just to go down again, and that cycle repeats. So the first part is the RPM method, right? Regulate, then perform from that place, and then multiply those wins. Now, you're asking, well, what does it take for us to regulate ourselves? Once we're there, how do we actually regulate? So that is what we call the rise breathing system. So very simple, okay? So we're going to run through these briefly. So RISE is the acronym that we have here. First one is to relax, okay? So the breath in itself has an innate way of turning our physiological response to either ramp up or slow down, right? It's what controls lots of what's going on. So if we would want to regulate and we need to either get excited, we need to calm down, we need to stabilize, there's all different ways for us to do this. But the first one is for us to simply, this is the R in rise, it's relax. And it's one of the more simple ones, a breathing technique called the 4-7-8 technique. Very simple, but what it does is it calms the nervous system and allows for us to reduce stress. So if we were wanting to turn down the knob on that anxious feeling, or we find a level of time, and so you might be asking like, well, what are the cues to know when I need to do this? So when you're feeling like emotional tension, when you are actually feeling physical tension, a lot of guys hold it in their shoulders, then coming to the relax stage of the rise breathing system is available to you to calm you down and of course relax and also regulate. And that is the 4-4-7-8. So that's 4 seconds in the nose, 7 seconds out, and an 8 second hold at the very bottom. Now, if you repeat this 4 to 5 times, this is literally a minute, right? And 4 to 5 rounds in literally a minute or a little bit over, 4 to 5 breaths that whole time. Whereas normal rate of speed, if you look at even at my like my Aura ring when I have it on, even when I'm sleeping or when I'm awake, its respiratory rate can be anywhere between 40 to 60 or more or a little bit less. Right? You're doing this to really, really slow down the system. And what happens is when our heart rate slows down, our brain slows down, and we're able to calm into this really good place to be able to perform at our best. And that's what, when I talk about mastering the inner world or performing at your very best or high performance, top performers, these are the type of things that they have to become aware of in order for them not to go past that breaking point. So that's one, right? So we might find ourselves needing to turn down and relax. Now, there's other parts. So this is the I, this is ignite. So there's other parts when we need to ramp up our energy, right? So if we find ourselves here and we need to get some more energy because we're getting ready to get into some tasks and we need some of that burst of a little bit of stress, right? Some adrenaline and whatnot to fire up the body. We can use what's called the breath of fire. So this is a lot of times seen in yoga and it's very quick. It helps increase the actual amount of oxygen in the body and helping with this mental alertness, if you will. And this is an ideal time when we need to boost our focus for like deep diving into sessions or problem solving. And so what it typically looks like, it's a quick in and out through the nose and you're doing it through the belly. So if you put both of your hands on the belly, right? You can do a quick in the nose, filling up and out. What that does, it starts to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which is what gets us to that point of breaking. But again, as we titrate between the two, we can really help ourselves and notice when we're there. But this igniting is the breath of fire with the which is quick in, let's quick out, nose only, into belly. Okay. So you can do this. If you do this for a minute, you're going to start to feel the heat building up. And sometimes, if you notice, that same type of heat is what goes on when we feel anxious. So it's using this level of stress to our advantage, but not overdoing it, which would be white knuckling it and never regulating or anything like that. Now, the next one is for us to, this is S for stabilize. And so this one essentially is for us just to create balance. Okay. And so there's two really easy ones that we can do here. One of them is a little bit, will take a little bit longer, but one of them is very easy in the moment. So we'll do the first one, which is, and many of you heard this, used by the Navy SEALs, box breathing, super simple. But what it does, right, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, and 4 second hold. So if you do this times 4 to 5, it'll equal about a minute. again, this is helping us to really, really stay calm under pressure. So it's similar to relaxing, but relaxing is really turning it down. And this is all act this stabilizing is allowing for us to be in that I would say, relaxing is more for when we need to go backwards. Stabilizing is when we're kind of right here and being able to, okay, I'm on this verge. Let me stabilize. Versus relax is I really just need to turn it down and go backwards. Now, the other one, if you don't have a minute or whatever, is called the psychological sigh. And that is really easy and really quick. It's a quick breath in through the nose with a double exhale out of the mouth. It goes like this. And so keeping the exhale a little bit longer on than the inhale actually is activating the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, to get us a little bit more calm instead of going too far into that stress realm. Now, the last one is elevate. And this is a very interesting one because the more that we do this, the more that we can create coherence in the brain and body. And this is highly important if we want to stay regulated, even in the most difficult situations. And so this is it's a very rhythmic, if you will, breathing technique. And it goes for 4 to 5 seconds in and 4 to 5 seconds out. And so we do it through the nose, and we want to bring our attention and focus onto the chest and heart area. So the air flows in, inflating like a balloon, and it flows out, deflating like a balloon. And the way that that works is that the signals physiologically show to the heart, okay, you're breathing really fast, or we just want you to get used to this, which is why this is for elevate. So it's elevating the baseline. Hey, get used to this slow rhythm being our baseline. And that way, no matter the curveball that gets thrown at us, we don't really falter. Okay, so this is ideally for just overall recovery. You can do it when you're trying to fall back asleep or getting to sleep, and it's all towards building and elevating a level of resilience towards stress, building the capacity. So that one is a 4 seconds in plus in heart, right? So breathing into the heart area, expanding like a balloon is what I like to say. 4 seconds out plus out of the heart. And again, repeating this. If you do this for 2 to 3 minutes a day, you will start to expand your capacity for stress because you're essentially telling your body that I am in control. And so if you're feeling out of rhythm, it will start to elevate the baseline to get you back into that more coherent state, which at the end of the day, that's what we're all here to do, is to find ourselves regulated, focused, and present no matter how hard we work, no matter what challenges come our way, professional challenges, personal obstacles, all that good stuff. So we'll get to some questions here in a minute. I'm going to jump back to my other screen here in just a moment. Here we are. So we just went through the Rise breathing system. Now, this is going to be another training later on, but I'm going to give you guys a little sneak peek here. So we've got these three components, right? So the first is we want to reset. And in order to reset, we need to be aware. And a lot of that goes on in the neocortex of the brain. And in the neocortex, it's where a lot of information is held. However, if we don't do anything with it, then it's just information and it doesn't do us any good. However, if we can become aware of it and take that information and do something with it, or we want to readjust or we decide to upgrade, then we move in for this to be a little bit more sustainable. But that's only sustainable through action. That's consistency over time of taking that information and doing something with it. That moves us into this second level, which is where the limbic brain is. It's associated with chemicals and activating the autonomic nervous system, both sympathetic and parasympathetic. And then finally, if we really, really dive into this work, if we really understand it, we keep taking action on it and doing it in spite of challenges, we can truly go to this bottom level, which is transform. And this is when our life starts to reflect our internal state of being. And it becomes more automatic and it gets drilled into a part of the brain called the cerebellum, which is the microprocessor. It's the seat of all of our habits and all of our automatic functions. So anything like, tying your shoe, driving the car, you don't want to go back and have to relearn those things all the time. And we don't want you to have to relearn how to regulate your nervous system all the time. Instead, we can teach and train the body, just like training our body to, like I said, tie our shoes or open a doorknob, to be able to do this for us. So we need to not only take this information, we have to implement it. It has to be done over time, and it has to be done so often with so much intention that that it can become who we are in our identity. And we switch away from that stuck cycle into that new operating system, which I talked about very early on. All right. So we went through a ton today. And, honestly, anyone that's on here and you can take this information and run with it, these are some real tools. Of course, just a few of many that have helped clients like the guys that I talked about earlier, Matt, Jason, other celebrity actors that I've worked with, Fortune 500 executives, pro athletes, really upgrade the internal game so that their external world, they can create massive success there. And I'm about transparency, so obviously I want to share as much information as I can. If you decide you want to go out and implement this and move into your day and get results like these guys, you're more than welcome. However, I do have a special offer for anybody who's here live and anybody watching the replay between now and the end of Sunday, which is 27th. So the end of the 27th, April 27th, 2025, to get some support for individuals who want to upgrade their lives and get into high performance a little bit quicker. And the reason I share that is most of the guys that are on these type of calls have an interest in already doing that, and they want to actually fast track it. And so I do want to share something special for anybody watching it or here live. Now, if that's not you, no problem. This is still a win-win. I totally appreciate you being here. Thank you for staying on, and I hope you got some value. However, I will give everyone a chance to jump off if they don't care to hear the offer at the very end. But for those that stay, I'll share that here in just a moment. So if anybody does care to jump off, feel free. If not, we will move on. Amazing. So let's get to the last piece here and we'll get going. So just as a thank you for everyone taking time out of the middle of the day on a Thursday afternoon, I'm sure everybody has tons of stuff going on. I want to share this exclusive offer specifically for what I talked about earlier, which is called the Mental Performance Accelerator. It's a 6-week intensive training that I've taken about 100 other men through, and it's all about the ultimate mindset and nervous system upgrade. And the goal is for us to prime the brain and body for optimal performance so that individuals can get back to elevating from that 60, 70, 80% operating system that we talked about earlier to that full 100%, knowing that when they're there, they will fast track to their goals much quicker. And so this 6 weeks entails a few different things. The first week is simply a one-on-one onboarding session with myself. The second week is an intensive training of about 12 hours of live training that's split amongst multiple different evenings that we do typically virtually. And then the last weeks 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all integration. So this is where we combined our private community in with group calls, and then of course lots of support, and then some pre-recorded tools like meditations, visualizations, and other things that you can utilize throughout those 30 days to not only learn the information, to talk with one another and support one another, but to actually integrate it and implement it. So at the end of the 30 days, this can become your new normal. It can become automatic. And so, if anybody has any interest in this for today and then all the way until the replay is done, which is replays offline, which will be, like I said, Sunday, April 27th, I am going to be offering $500 off the standard price, 2 months into our private community, and then a bonus one-on-one call with me, which is like a breakthrough session to really dive deep and you get even more personalized to whatever it is you have going on. So, what I'm going to do here in just a moment is I'm going to drop a couple links in the chat briefly. And once I do that, then I will open it up for any questions, comments, things I can walk through if anybody still wants to chat. And give me just a second. So if the offer that I shared is interesting to you, I will just share those 2 links to register in the chat. So there's 2 different options. There's a deposit and a pay in full. So I'm going to share those there. You'll also be getting those in the email for those that stuck around. So I'm going to jump that in. Those are in the link, the chat for anybody, those links. And I will open it up if anybody has any questions. If not, we can get going, but I'll share it Anybody on here live? Questions, comments, things they wanted to share, or things they have going on that they felt resonated, feel free to jump in.
I had
Awesome.
one question that came up.
Yep.
It's all great stuff, Pat. It's more just timely with how my day's going. Do you have any techniques or anything that you've seen when uh, maybe it's um, a leader that you
Hmm.
work with that exhibits the anxious state and
Gotcha.
it disseminates to the people around
Hmm.
that person? And
Yeah.
you can do it. I could like, oh, I can apply this to myself in that moment,
Hmm.
but you see it kind of spreading.
Hmm. Well, I'll just say that the when you become aware of it, it's a lot easier to see others' patterns of not being aware of it. So like, noticing and knowing that I know you and noticing your level of emotional intelligence, it's a lot easier to see that. Um, I think I just led just led a couple sessions about resiliency in the workplace at a company yesterday with the group. And we were talking about this because what do you do? How do you approach them, especially if it's your superior? And a couple of things that come to mind is first and foremost, we created a huge list, and some of them was a self inventory of like, if I am going to have this conversation, I need to really not allow for my emotions to come into it. I do need to utilize maybe some of these tools before I get into it. I need to also, which is we use an acronym API, assume positive intent. They might be going through that, and I also go through it, right? So it's like we don't also
Mhm.
know what's going on in their life. So kind of being cautious about um, the we versus the I of like I did this and you didn't do that, and now it creates this tension versus hey, we're a team. I want to help you. What's going on? Like that. That would be one technique because
Actually, that's
again, at the very end, you can't change them and they can't change you. But the more regulated you are, the more um, the more you're able to be the leader of the leader almost, which is like a huge skill to even know that you're doing that. It's like huge, is to come in with a solution. Obviously, verify and make sure that like there aren't other external factors handling, like forcing them to be that way. And then also like in those moments, that low and slow breathing, it will radiate to them, right? If you find yourself high and tight in the breathing and you're upregulated, and whether they see it or not, or they even notice it, and they most likely aren't going to notice it in you if they can't notice it in themselves. And again, this is not bashing them. However, like by you just staying regulated, something's going to give. Either they're not going to like it and they're going to leave, or they're going to come down, raise up, come down, whatever it is, to your level, and that's going to allow for the conversation to go over smooth. So those would just be a couple things that come to mind. And there
I
was
mean,
body language, of course, like just being conscious of the words you use, body language, hoping that they feel seen when you're in those conversations. Now, of course, these are very like um, communication type things that can work, but they do lead into how people are perceiving the situation, whether they can feel like they can speak into it or whether they're feeling defensive, or they might be feeling that you're aggressive towards asking them about that. But again, those are just a few different things. I'm trying to think of everything else that was listed there yesterday, but it was quite a bit. Um, yeah, body language, coming there with a solution, checking your own emotions, watching your tone. There's so many different things that you can do to better position yourself for the best likely outcome, knowing that you can't change them.
mhm.
And a lot of times we use the 85-10-5 rule, which is 85% of most conflicts is just a miscommunication. So, like if I ask you, how do you determine if I the word forever, or no, future, how long is the future? Like,
Indefinite. I mean, to me,
well, I was saying like what's the future for you and your your venture? Like how far out would you think? Like 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 6 years, like
5 plus.
5 plus.
Yeah.
But to someone else, they might think, 6 months. So it is really getting to know. So you got to really verify all those words. Then the 10% a lot of times is, yeah, what was the 10%? The 10% was, so yeah, the 85 for the miscommunication. The 10% was the, like just the attitude of going into it. So checking the tones and things you're using in the last one, the 5% was simply values, right? Some things that you can't be changed, whether it's like religion or politics or certain things, like everybody's going to come to those places, but a lot of it's the miscommunication or just
Hmm.
misunderstanding. So just a couple things to think about as you get into that.
No, that's super helpful in time. I mean, because I can notice I try to be pretty
Yeah.
steady all the time, and
Uh-huh.
in this current moment, I'm finding like being a little bit more reactionary and having to
Sure.
watch my tone and all those types of things. But definitely comes from a place of assuming positive intent always, like
Yeah.
not a bad person. You know,
Right.
it's a weird. It's
Mm-hmm.
but I like the framing of whenever because I do think it we're approaching a moment to have a
Mm-hmm.
group conversation of a select amount of people to come at it from a place of we. Like we're all feeling
Mm-hmm.
anxious. We're all feeling this, and not pointing the finger at one person for
Mm-hmm.
maybe creating it, but it's all
Sure.
coming at it from that perspective.
Yeah, when you can come with a solution, people are more willing to compromise or get on, and it doesn't feel like so much pressure. So, like in it, then of course, create tactical steps. Come with the solution. Get both sides of the story. What else did we have written up on there? Oh, it was a whole whiteboard of stuff. But yeah, those are all helpful. And then, of course, just checking that you being the one to stay regulated. It's what we talked about with the coherent and incoherent part of what the training that I just had in here was. If you look at even like the Heart Math Institute, they do tons of studies, and one of the studies is talks about the relational frequencies of what goes on from an incoherent person to a coherent person. And you can put 2 to 3 coherent people who are low, slow breathing, very regulated, calm, and one person can come and sit them down, and that's incoherent or anxious or whatever, and simply by proximity, that person will essentially bring in their energy to calm them down. And they've been able to measure it through, they do um, heart rate variability is what they typically utilize. And there are these heart rate variability monitors that they can do on the ears. And so the one study is they had 3 people who knew exactly what it took to drop into coherence, like just being regulated, slowing down the breathing, that type of stuff, especially that last one in elevate. So the last one in the rise, which is heart coherence breathing. And then the third person or the fourth person who didn't know how to do that, but nobody knew any rules. They knew what they were supposed to do, the 3 people, but the other person didn't know there was rules. So they all went into the same room and the announcer just said, go. And then they saw that these 3 started to regulate, and this person who was dysregulated or incoherent started to basically mimic what they were doing, but there were no words said. The guy just said go. They focused on themselves, that 3 group, and that person didn't know what was going on. And just by proximity and association, those people were able to influence them. And so it's the same thing when we get into conversations with coworkers, with superiors, significant others, or like, I even think about it in the sales aspect, or anybody who potentially is watching this who does sales, is like the more I stay calm, cool, and collected, the tension from the other party that you might be trying to pitch to also then calms down. And when they calm down, you're going to have a better conversation. They're going to feel more connected to you. First, if I'm anxious or I'm overwhelmed and then they're also going to be feeling that and you see them sitting like this, it's a dead giveaway that you're basically feeding into that.
Hmm.
So those are a couple things that you could also think about.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I can think about just curious if they do those studies virtually. Just, I'm sure there's a similar, like what the difference is between in person versus
Oh,
over
yeah, that's
Zoom.
true. However, yeah, I mean that's a whole different realm.
The
But
body language at all.
yeah, you
I think the
can
parts of it still work for sure.
sure. Yep. Cool, man. Well,
Thanks.
any other questions from you? You're good to go?
No, I'm good. That
Cool,
was all
man.
I had from
Awesome.
yeah. When you're
Yeah, well,
pulling
thanks
some
for
slides, seeing the incoherent and all that, I'm like, oh, this is timely. So
yeah. Yeah, I like that. I just yeah, give me a second.